Hello and welcome to Happy Hour. Today is Tuesday, February 26th. I am Eileen Cook, and we are here to talk all things crafty. So I was saying just before we hit the record button that I wanted to talk about the issue of focus, to which everyone laughed, probably because, there's been some issues with focus. But I also wanted to first leave it open. Did anyone have any specific questions that they wanted to talk about? That's a big no. Or wait.
No, I do. Wait.
Wait. Okay.
Um, I'm writing conflict. Obviously, my character, external conflict, and I'm struggling a little bit how to write internal conflict and internal. Like I'm writing them, but I don't know if it's effective or how much do I need or. And I was watching. What made me think of it was I was watching a Harry Potter, one of the ones that he's really struggling, one of the later ones, and he does such a good job of struggling. Should he be? He's part Voldemort and part snake and part whatever, and you can really see the internal struggle that he's facing as well as the external struggle. And I'm just sort of had questions about the best way to represent that so that you're seeing kind of all sides of the character.
What a fabulous question, Tony. So I'm going to let other people chime in if they want to as well. But first, let's just go high level and talk about what we mean when we say external versus internal conflict so that we're at least all talking about hopefully the same thing. So the idea is that external conflict is what is happening in the world that is blocking your character from getting what they want. So that is usually another character. There's usually some kind of antagonist that's in the way of that. It might be nature. So it might be that they have to struggle through the Yukon and get out alive from a plane crash. So it might be a nature kind of thing. It can be something like a monstery zombies kind of situation or a systemic kind of thing like racism or something like that they're bumping up against. If you are doing something large and systemic, so you want to do a book on, someone dealing with racism, like try to find a way to personify that because it will be easier. Like having something like racism is so big and so broad that you will probably do a little bit better if you can find some way to sort of narrow in on that. And then conversely, when we talk about internal conflict, it is the idea of what is going on inside your character that is causing them challenges and difficulties. I sometimes get asked the question, can a character have internal conflict only? This usually comes up with people writing literary because they have an entire book that's inside someone's head, basically. And so they're looking for that internal. I would never say you can't, but I would argue that having some kind of external conflict is going to make your book much easier to write. In an ideal world, you're going to have both external and internal conflict. So you're probably looking for both of those. In most cases, what I would argue as well is that your character may be very aware and probably should be very aware of what the external conflict is, but they may not be fully aware of what the internal conflict is. And that is that we may not be aware of what is our own biggest barrier. So then how do you write that, or how do you get into internal conflict? Because that was actually Tony's question. So let's go to that. So the idea of internal conflict, I'd be curious, other people, their approach, but certainly one of the ones that I steal from quite often is Don Moss's idea of what is it that your character wants most in the world, and articulate that. And then what is the opposite of that thing? And then how could they potentially want both of those? So if your character is a single mom who desperately wants to be made partner in her law firm, but at the same time, she really wants to be a stay-at-home mom, you're setting up an internal conflict because she's not going to be able to do both of those things and will potentially have to choose between two moral choices where there isn't a clear right and wrong. And I think that's often what makes for a good internal conflict is that idea that there isn't necessarily a right or wrong choice. It's just that you're going to have to pick one of those. So I think that is a really good way to kind of drill down into internal conflict. Also a huge big fan of backstory and thinking about backstory as a way of dealing with internal conflict, and what are the kind of stories that we tell ourselves that you might have to kind of vanquish that foe to move forward. So if one of the things that you tell yourself is, I am unlovable, no one's ever going to love me, blah, 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 and this is a romance, and, eventually you want the person to, make a meaningful thing. First, they have to be aware that that is a story that they're telling themselves, because what they probably say out loud is something more like, you can't trust other people. But like, they're probably not as honest with why they feel that thing. So you have to kind of put them on the sofa, I guess, and do some counseling with them around what are your beliefs and where are those coming from? And are you being fully honest about those internal beliefs? Will be another way to kind of dig away at what's going on internally for the character. So I think that can set up some interesting things. You can set up an internal and external battle against each other, which is kind of like the single mom example, where I'm fighting to make partner and there's someone trying to stop me, but there's some part of me that maybe doesn't want to make partner. So that's kind of a conflict lock even within myself, which will sort of set up that kind of barrier. Other people, how do you guys drill down an internal conflict? Go ahead, Bonnie.
Sometimes it's showing, because I'm thinking more, Tony wanted to know how to show it. So showing the difference between how they act and talk and what they're thinking. Because we tend to we might think things like, I hate that person, but we'll say something like, oh, that's nice. Like you did with your twisting finger thing, which really, your ring twisting. So that's more in the writing side of things, to show those internal, maybe how they really want to act or what they really want to say. And then because of their situation or because of their wounds or because of their backstory, they don't say it. But there's something in the way they act that kind of shows a contradiction. And I find that's kind of a cool way to show internal conflict, because they're acting the way they are expected to act, but they actually don't feel that way or really want to be there.
Well, and I think anytime you're showing a character that is saying or doing something that's contradicting what their internal thought is, that's really interesting for a reader, because you're instantly like, why are you doing that? If you're saying this and you're doing this, what's going on with that? Why is that happening? So I think that's a really interesting way. The other thing to think about is, can you hear my dog crying for dinner? That is what that is. That is we feel it is that time, which it is not, by the way.
He has an internal and external conflict.
Yes. Like that gift that like small children and dogs have to figure out when you're on the phone. So I think another thing you can look at is whether or not another character is calling your main character on their BS. So you may have a character who says something like, again, if we go with the romance section, if someone said, you're only saying that because of how, your ex treated you, or they sort of have something where they're sort of nailing, and your character might be like, that has nothing to do with it. This is all about blah, blah, blah. But the reader might be like, I think that character's friend actually was onto something and was, trying to show it in that sense. So having another character call your character out is a way to show kind of the internal conflict. Or you can see something like, if you have a character that wants financial, like I'm thinking of your character, Tony. So someone who, resents that they haven't had certain financial things, but may feel something about it. So you may see them at a store, looking at a Louis Vuitton handbag and kind of caressing it softly and thinking how much they would like to have this particular thing. And then seeing someone come in who's kind of snooty and all that kind of stuff, and then being repulsed by the fact that they kind of wanted the same thing that this other person had. And having that internal battle between themselves between, I want these things of status and money, and yet I resent that I kind of want those things, or I want to be a person who doesn't want those things, if
So
that makes sense.
Yeah.
a conflict between their desires and their values.
Yes. Anytime internal conflict is all about that push within ourselves. And it's usually some kind of morals or values where we kind of, and this happens to all of us, like where we want to be someone who's really giving and all this kind of stuff. But at the same time, we want the cookies for ourselves. We don't want to share those things, or, we don't want to care about something, but we kind of still do, right? And we catch ourselves doing that. A good question to ask yourself is there something that your parents do that drives you crazy? Because it's probably something that you're aware of that you do yourself. So for example, one of the things that drives me nuts is my dad grew up very poor. And so he's always constantly trying to, I think, reassure himself that he has arrived. So he's very bad about, like, if you were to be like, oh, I like your watch, you'd be like, this, it's a Rolex. You'll never guess what it costs. Go ahead, guess. And then he'll tell you what it costs. And it drives me insane. And I don't have any of that, but I do have that same thing around sometimes, though I'm way better, like worked on it in my 40s, but feeling the need that I had to convince other people that I was worthy of their attention. So while it wasn't around financial stuff, probably because I grew up basically fairly middle class, it was around other things where I would find myself trying to establish that, yes, I'm really deserve to be in this spot, and you need to know that I'm successful, and you need to know that I'm this, because I feel the need to convince you. Mm-hmm. It's a running joke in the Surrey conference. Like, I always find it interesting when you see author bios, it'll be something like, Diana Gabaldon is the author of the New York Times bestselling series, Outlander. And then you'll have someone else and it'll be like 5-page bio, like Eileen Cook, blah, 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 blah. And she won this. And in high school, she won this award. And then in college, she won this other writing award. And it's like, Diana Gabaldon doesn't feel the need to sort of say to people like, hey, by the way, I'm kind of a big deal. We just kind of know it. You can kind of tell by the fact she has a line outside the door for people waiting for her books. So she doesn't feel this need to sort of convince everyone else. But I think when you're insecure about something, we often, and again, in terms of way of showing it, that's often something where we will go above and beyond. So Tony, you had a comment, and then Marianne had a comment. So
yeah, so specifically, what's bringing this question is, so my character is being pulled into a situation that he has to go rescue some people, and his first inclination is, well, I could just head back to Canada and let somebody else do this, right? In fact, that's kind of that's what he'd like to do, but instead he becomes the hero, so he's got to kind of push through that. But if you just, okay, it's sort of like, okay, now I'm the hero, and then he's now the hero, and it's like, well, if there's no other, how many times should I be, I don't want him whining, well, I could have been doing something else. I don't want that to happen all through the book. I want him to be sort of strong, but I want him to have some self-doubt, but I don't know how much to put in so that it's realistic.
Well, let's break that down for a minute, because I think that's really interesting. So why does he not want to be the hero?
Well, because he could die, right?
It's a good reason. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. He could die. And it's easiest to not be the hero, right? The path of least resistance, right?
Other things that come to my mind is, like, when you're the hero, then there's also attention on you. And some people are not comfortable with being the center of attention. Mm-hmm. You might then be responsible. Again, if I'm the hero, then, other people, when something bad, everyone looks at you like, fix it. And it's like, look, I can fix this one thing, but I don't want to keep fixing things. It might be that you don't feel worthy. Like, to be a hero in that character's mind, what does that mean? And, I feel uncomfortable with the idea, like, once you say that I'm the hero, that means that I'm this stuff and I'm not that stuff. So I feel like a fraud and a fake.
Right.
So I think drilling down and then using different aspects of that, like in the moment, it's probably like, I don't want to do this because it's unsafe and I could die.
Right.
But someone, oh, that's another good one, Bonnie, that someone else is better suited to be the hero. Like this other person should step up and do this. And then that kind of thing where, again and again, like, because part of what I can see you pushing against with, if your thing is, I don't want to be the hero, is I don't want to be responsible and what that means. And I'm just kind of going even like the most basic thing. I would say growing up for a lot of us, one of our big heroes is our dad, right? And so thinking about like, what does it mean to be the dad? Well, being the dad means you're responsible for sometimes, financial issues. You're responsible for the safety of your family. Like that's a lot. And again, obviously it's not that cut and dried. Like there are families who work out all different dynamics, but I think feel free to stop me, Tony, but I can imagine if I was a young guy getting ready to get married, part of it would be like, do I feel ready to take on being responsible for all these other people? Do I feel ready to be in charge of this stuff and all those kinds of things? And so sort of kind of backing into, and if he has any daddy issues, that might be something to explore in that as well. Like being a hero means being these things, and I don't know if I'm actually that good of a guy.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's the crux. He's at this decision point. He's been pulled into this thing. There's people's lives at risk. He's really the only one that can do it, but he doesn't want to, right?
Yeah.
So I like the idea of thinking back to his father. That might.
Yeah, and you can go either way with that, Tony. I mean, his dad could have been a complete
Failure
monster of some kind, and he grew up feeling that, living his life to try to be as different from that as possible, and that he's always trying to prove that he's not whatever his father was,
right.
And therefore his self-esteem is low, so he doesn't see himself as heroic material because from whatever is cut from the cloth,
Right.
So I've read books where the hero has self-doubts because he's constantly questioning his own worth because of whatever the family. So you can go either way with that.
Right. Okay.
Or like a dad that you thought was your hero, and then you found out he did something really shitty, right? And then coming to terms with that, because one of the things that I think about is, I can imagine someone being like, I can't be a hero. Like I've done this or that in my past, or, I know I have these faults, and someone kind of reminding you, like, you choose to be a hero over and over. Like nobody is Superman all the time. Not even Superman. Sometimes he's Clark Kent, right? Like it's a constant choice. And sometimes you make the heroic choice and sometimes you don't. And I think we sometimes get caught, whether it's hero or other things, like with an idea of this is who I am. So that means that that's who I always am in every situation. And then feeling like, oh, well, but I know that I'm not, so therefore I can't be that. Like I see that a lot with mothers where people will say like, I want to be a good mother, but I yelled at my kids, or I did this thing or that thing, so therefore I'm not a good mother. Versus like, no, like being a good mom is 1,000,001 decisions made over and over and over again. And it's the base of all of those that you're kind of judged upon. But I think that's an interesting area to mine and explore for the character, which is, if I don't want to be a hero, what does that mean? Like, why don't I want to take that on? And then thinking as many reasons, and then looking for how those might come up at different points.
Right.
Marianne, you had something about conflict or internal conflict?
Just in general terms, I was thinking about the different, particularly in romance or romantic relationships, because the relationship itself is both internal and external conflict simultaneously. And sometimes in subgenres where there's a big external conflict, some kind of physical danger or mutual enemy, it's not so much of an issue. But in a lot of romance, there isn't any of that really big stuff going on outside. So the conflict is often that the character is attracted to the other person but won't allow themselves to have a relationship because of whatever, whether it's daddy issues or mommy issues or some wound from their past or an insecurity or a moral or ethical issue that, so that it's got to do with the story that they're telling themselves about, like they may want it. There's parts of them that are wanting this thing, and then ideas why they can't have it. They can't allow themselves to have it because they're trying to be better than that in some way, in some fashion. So just the story that I'm just finishing up, for example, both the characters have a kind of a ghost in their past, a character who they loved and lost and is influencing how they tackle this next chapter in their life. And so one of them is trying to sort of live up to the high standards of the lost loved one, and the other one is trying to sort of make up for what they perceive as their own deficiencies before that person died, and now they're trying to be different, they're trying to be better, and that a relationship is too selfish a thing, you know, that they have too much self-sacrifice that they are required to do before they could even think about that. So it's just not even on the table.
Yeah, I think it's that internal thing, like spending time, and I think romance writers do it a lot because the conflict is often that internal thing. Like, what is it that is stopping yourself? And as someone who's, you know, gone through counseling recently, like, you know, there's a lot of those conversations where the counselor's pushing you to figure out what are the things that you tell yourself that then become self-fulfilling prophecies because you kind of put it out there and it leads to that. Alyssa, you had a comment.
Yeah, I guess one of the questions you could ask yourself about the character is, what's the worst thing he thinks that could happen? Like, what's the worst case? Like, often when people are saying, you know, they want to do something, they're imagining a worst case scenario. So I don't know, maybe if asking, trying to figure out what his worst case scenario is, if that sort of helps you figure out what's holding him back and what the internal conflict is.
I think that's a really good question. Or what are you afraid of? Is another way of kind of backdooring into that, depending, you know, which resonates with people and what kind of makes you think that. But it is that idea of, you know, if I do this thing, there's obviously what could happen if it goes well, but often what stops us is what if it doesn't go well, right? And so you'll see people who will say, you know, I don't want to do that because of this and that. Is anyone else really good at catastrophizing, or am I the only person who has an innate skill at this? But that's that ability. And I, you know, will do it all the time where I will sort of be like, someone will say, would you, you know, be willing to present at this conference? And I initially will go to like, what if like it's such a much larger room and I can't do it, and then I'm stumbling and then I look like a fool, and then like by the end of it it's like, and then my career will be over. Like I've taken it to the nth degree and I'm now being stoned in a public spot, you know, where it's like, okay, well, the odds are it's probably not going to get to that point. Like it might go really well. There's one option. Or it might be like it went okay, which is probably the second most likely option. And we're a long way from public stoning. So kind of figuring out if your character has a tendency to do that, because I think certain people do. Like you have an ability to kind of go to that worst case spot.
There's this course I took once where the idea in terms of determining the character's motivation is like, in Tony's case, to step forward to be the hero or not. And if he's disinclined to do it, then ask yourself or ask the character why, and then answer that question, but don't stop there. Keep asking why and dig deeper and deeper and deeper until you get to something that is kind of a universal human
truth.
Yes, that's the word, I guess. Yeah.
So So Alyssa thinks public stoning is going to come back. The popularity of The Handmaid's Tale, I think, is going to make it a total comeback situation. We'll see it come back. But I would put forward something that Marianne said that I think is really useful is when I was in graduate school, and I know I've mentioned this to people before, but my graduate advisor, one of his biggest pieces of advice that I took with me was he was like, you need to ask why 5 times before you've gotten to the true answer of it. So you say to someone, why didn't you get your homework done? And they say, well, I was up really late last night. Well, why were you up so late last night? Well, I was taking care of my brother. Well, why were you taking care of your brother? Well, because my mom works nights. Well, why does your mom work nights? Well, my dad left and now, she has to take on 2 jobs. So like the more times that you're asking the why, the more likely you are to be getting down to what's really the core of the issue. Whereas if you stop at, I didn't get to bed, then the solutions that you're offering aren't necessarily going to be that useful because they're solutions that are tackling like, well, you should try setting your alarm earlier. So you get like, you're offering solutions that aren't the real solution to the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I can't say that when I was working with people, I was always like, why? Because it makes you very unpopular as a counselor. But it is certainly a very valid thing to be sort of drilling down with someone like, well, help me understand that. So if you said to someone, Tony, what is stopping you from sending your book out? What if I get rejected? Well, what would happen if you got rejected? So kind of taking on Alyssa's question, like, what's the worst case situation with that?
I die.
No, the good news is you only feel like you're dying.
Okay, yeah.
The best news is you can have that feeling over and over and over again in publishing.
Groundhog Day, writer's edition.
You start to feel invincible at some point because you're like, oh, I only feel like I'm going to die. But, sort of drilling down. And I mean, I remember, for myself having that realization where I was going through a period in writing where I was like, I just don't know if I can deal with the rejection anymore. Yes, you could get locked up. Excellent point, Alyssa. You could get locked up by your biggest fan, Kathy Bates style, and that will go very badly for you. But I know for me, like I just built rejection, just saying like, I don't know if I can stand it anymore. I don't know if I can face one more rejection. And, getting feedback from someone else, like, so what? Like, so someone says no. And for me, it was this kind of light bulb moment around like, I probably could survive some no's. But if I quit, then for sure that's the end of it, right? So for me, the desire, and when we talk about character motivation, is around pushing or pulling through that thing. So if I don't want to be a hero because I don't want to put my life at risk, that's really valid. So what's going to either push me out of that or pull me out of that? So am I pushed out of it because I look over and I see someone watching me and I don't want that person because I'm trying to impress her. So I don't want her to watch me being a wussy. So I'm going to like suddenly, strap on my big girl panties and do something very brave because I want that other person to see me as brave. So that's kind of a push motivation. Or is it that I'm going to feel compelled or called in some greater sense? So, yeah.
Sometimes the thing that pulls a character past something that they really don't want to do because it's dangerous or uncomfortable in some way is that they don't want to be the person who didn't make that effort because there's someone that is at risk that they don't want to disappoint or abandon.
Well, and this is why,
and so that can reflect back to the backstory, right?
This is often why you will see people will often do very heroic things for someone else and not necessarily always for themselves. So the kind of very cliche example is you might have a woman who's been abused over and over and over again and will stay in that relationship. But when that person turns and tries to hurt one of their children, all of a sudden she goes all burning bed on him, right? And will take him out, right? Because it's like, I would accept that you did this for me. I couldn't, be, brave in that sense. But if you're going to threaten someone that I love, then I will take on that sort of leap. So you will see doing that kind of things. And there's certainly tons of the male fantasy kind of thrillers, which is all like, you know, he killed my wife or kids, and now the mild-mannered guy is now going to go all out there and, you know, save the day, go all Liam Neeson on things, right? So it becomes that thing where it's like, you've now gone a step too far. So sort of thinking about, you know, what shakes your person out of whatever it is that they normally do. And sometimes it's a split second. And there are whole comedies built around the idea of somebody does something that they normally wouldn't do, and then everyone sees them as the hero. And all of a sudden they're now being recast in that role because someone, and they're waiting to be found out. Like that's the grand thing of the imposter syndrome, right? Where you think that you're faking it. And then all of a sudden at some point you realize like, no, I'm actually am doing that. That's the whole idea behind intentions, and the whole idea that you're going to sort of repeat things to yourself until you start to believe it. You see that come out in stories or various things where people are taking on something and then eventually that becomes who they are. And they have the realization that they were always that person on the inside. They just had to kind of accept it and see themselves in that role. So that becomes something that will happen. Other thoughts on internal, external conflict? All right, Tony.
That was good. Thanks.
You're welcome. It was fun to talk about, so thank you. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes about focus. And the reason that I'm thinking about it is because it's something that I have been struggling with over the past couple of months, as I have a lot going on. And so I'm finding myself struggling to kind of focus in on things and get certain things done. There's certainly a lot of research out there that focus is becoming harder for us in general because we're becoming a nation of people who compulsively check our phones. I think I was reading one article that said people check their email up to 85 times a day. And if you think that, you know, at least some of that time you're sleeping, hopefully, you're talking about compulsively checking your email a whole lot, right? And so again, there's a lot of other studies that say that when you pull your attention away from something, and there's different outcomes, but how long it takes you then to refocus. So part of it is understanding and acknowledging that we actually are not good multitaskers. We all want to think that we are, and some of us try and live in that delusion for some period of time, but the truth of the matter is you really don't. And that's where all the studies come from, why you shouldn't be checking your phone when you're driving. Because we don't divide our attention very well. And when we think that we're doing it, what we're actually doing is we're taking our eyes off at least one of those balls. And that's how you run down pedestrians. So how do you do, yeah, like, oopsie, that's something you want to do. But what we do know is that focus is basically something that you can work on and practice and get better with. So it is something similar to any other kind of muscle group that you're using. So practicing focus is really good. And that's really where one of the big things that we talk about, and of course we're big fans of here at the old Creative Academy, is things like the writing sprints, or any type of thing where you're trying to deliberately set up some focused time for yourself to accomplish a particular task. So setting it up, and you can grow that. So you can certainly do something where you're starting with 10 or 15 minute breaks and working up from that. I think most of the people here are probably good with 30 to an hour long periods, because I've seen people do it. But setting it up not just necessarily as the writing sprints, although we have lots of those throughout the day, but sort of setting it up like, I need an hour to work on my mailing list. And I may not finish it, but for an hour, I'm going to do it. Because I think what I tend to do is I put lots of things on my to-do list. Behold. Right? And I like nothing more than checking things off. Right? So I will often, and I know this is a problem that I have, will look for the things that I can check off the most quickly, so that I can have lots of things checked off. But often the things that I needed to make some progress on don't get worked on. So I managed to pick up the dry cleaning and make reservations for the weekend, but I didn't manage to get something done. So blocking off, like now one of the things I'm putting on my to-do list, instead of saying, for example, read all 4 SFU student papers is I will be like, read SFU papers 1 hour. And then I will basically turn off other things, and I will hopefully get through 4 student papers. But if not, I know I at least got a concentrated hour done on it. So setting up set times for yourself to do things and actually trying to keep with those. So whether that's a writing sprint where you're trying to get words on the page, or an editing sprint, or I'm going to spend an hour working on my website, but doing that and having it broken down into manageable chunks is the other thing that will go a long way with that. Other people, one of the suggestions that came up in the research was taking a list of what are your most common distractions and recognizing them so that you spot them more quickly, and then hopefully stop yourself from going down that rabbit hole. Again, I tend to do this with multitasking as I start thinking like I can do all of these things. So I'll just put in a load of laundry and then do this and then do this. And at the same time, I'm going to have a phone call with someone else. And then, of course, what I'm actually not doing is any of it. Meditation is suggested to helping with focus. So I don't know, does anyone else meditate? Mariana's tried it. I would suggest if people haven't tried it, there's a great app called Headspace, which I have downloaded and I have been working on, because quieting my brain is not something that I do particularly very well. So trying to kind of be present and focused in a moment is helpful. Tony, are you saying that you've tried it out?
No, I was actually looking for, and thank you. Just as I clicked off, you were talking about Headspace. I'll have a look at that because I would like to.
Really nice because they have different programs. So like one of the things that I started with there, because it was a challenge for me at this point, was sleep. So they had sort of particular guided meditations to sort of help you kind of turn off your brain so that you could go to sleep. But they have some for creativity. They have them for sort of all different areas. And I find for myself, I still don't have the skill set to calm my own brain down. But if I'm listening to someone who's telling me what to think and kind of walking me through, it helps.
I had dabbled many times and never been able to create a habit of it. But so I decided I would actually take this course, which I took through Mind Valley. They have all different kinds of courses and programs that you can take. And this one was taught by a woman who runs a meditation center in New York and LA and works with a lot of athletes and celebrities and stuff. And the way that they pitched it sounded very appealing because I think one of the difficult things for people in modern Western, societies with a lot of technology and distractions and multitasking and is coming to terms with this idea that we have to empty our mind or calm our mind. And this technique doesn't pretend to do that. It acknowledges that there are noises and distractions and that your mind is a very busy machine and teaches a series of steps that deal with that. And I signed up for it because I thought I'm going to pay this whack of money. And then I had to show up every day for 33 days. And interestingly, because I went through that, I established the habit. So I've been meditating every day, every morning since December 1st. So that's 2.5 months, right? 2.5 months now.
Yeah.
And I've never done that before in my life.
Yeah.
Where I could get up. And that's actually the first thing I want to do every day.
There's something to and the term is gamification of various things. And this is why Fitbits have become popular or, certainly things on the iWatch or whatever, is when we sort of do certain things where we're trying to trick ourselves into establishing a habit. So this is why, in part, we think things like Weight Watchers sometimes will work better than people trying to lose weight on their own. Is anytime that there's something where you've put money down on something, we sometimes tend to hold ourselves more accountable. So we'll do that. Like I find one of the things that Headspace does, which of course I find interesting, is they do a thing where they will sort of check off how many days in a row you've done it. And there's
Don't break
something,
the chain.
yeah, you don't like there's something about that thing where it's sort of the, so many days since an accident, like nobody wants to be the one to break that kind of thing. So you kind of tend to stick with things. So anything that you can sort of fool yourself with, to sort of get in the habit. And for me, what I liked with Headspace is it was a 10-minute thing. And I was like, if I don't have 10 minutes in a day, like I'm just not trying hard. So, and for me, I started with the 10 minutes before bed because it was like, I need to quiet my thoughts in some way, shape, or form, which is why I'm not sleeping. So that's when I started sticking it in. I was like, well, I can spend, an extra 10 minutes reading, or I could do this for 10 minutes. And it became a little bit easier to kind of slide it in that way.
Yeah.
Related to that is there's a lot of really solid research that shows that physical exercise is good for concentration and focus. I recently taught a class for small kids, and I just about lost my mind. It was 3 hours with kids that are grades 3 through 7. And I felt like I spent the entire hour doing things like, Alyssa, put down the pen. Stop poking Tony. Stop poking. Give me the pen now, Alyssa. Give me the pen. Tony, get your hand out of your pants. All right, Bonnie, shush, 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 shush. Marianne, enough of that. All right, wait, Tony, sit back down. Alyssa, I said, give me that pen. Like, I felt like I spent this whole time like trying to corral these young kids, and like I was exhausted at the end of it. And so I called up a friend who teaches elementary school, and I was like, I need help because I have to go back. And she talked about, like, she's like, when kids get really, really squirrely, like she said, one of the things you can do is take a break and say, stop. Okay, everybody, we're going to do 10 jumping jacks, right? And get them to do 10 jumping jacks and then let them sit down. And you'll see them quiet a little bit. So there is something to, we are so now conditioned that we don't move our bodies, that we have sedentary jobs and we sit most of the time. And we know it, like, sitting is the new smoking, right? That's the whole idea, is that you want to try and find that. So finding some time to have some kind of physical activity will probably help you focus. So again, if you're going to be doing which is my new thing about trying to kind of block off times for different things, make sure that there's some block in there. Whether it's for walking your dogs, if you have them, whether it's getting to the gym, or even if it is just like, okay, I'm having a hard time concentrating, I'm going to stand up and do 5 jumping jacks, like just something to try and shift that. There are a lot of games and apps that you can get that are designed to sort of help you. So there's thoughts that things like Sudoku or memorizing things will be sort of help you focus your attention. There's some debate about whether or not that's true or not true, but it probably doesn't hurt, right? Because you're just exercising a different part of your brain. So thinking about that. One thing that's good news is they talked about, for concentration, reading more novels. Let's hear that as a call out. Because we're reading so much short stuff, whether that's stuff on the web or magazine articles and things like that, but just getting in the habit of occasionally stretching your brain by reading a longer piece is useful. I would probably add to that, although I have absolutely zero research on this, is the idea of occasionally reading longer pieces that are not your usual thing, where you actually have to focus a little bit more. So whether that's nonfiction, and I know we were talking in book club about reading a narrative nonfiction, I think that'll be an interesting idea to try out. And then I was curious for other people if there's anything that you guys do that sort of helps you with that focus and concentration. Alyssa? Yeah.
I started doing morning pages, and when I first started writing them, I found that as I was writing, something would come into my mind and I would want to go to Google, or like I would constantly think, oh no, I have to do this, and I would constantly want to go away from the pages. So I started forcing myself to not go away and just kind of making a note or like writing a note, and that kind of helped. But I still kind of keep track of, like, if I stop writing the page, like I'll note the time down, and like I'll see how long it took me to write my pages, and I can kind of see if I was focused by that. It's like, oh, it only took me 12 minutes today, I'm doing better.
I think a good part of that is doing the distraction thing, where now I'm trying to get in the habit of, instead of being like, oh, right, I have to call that person, and then immediately stopping what I'm doing and going to call that person, but just writing it down off to the side and knowing I will come back to that at a later time.
This
Yeah. Yeah.
Natasha and I started using this, and then I think Donna picked it up, and we're all completely gaga over it. It's just one particular app called 35 binaural programs, but it's brain entrainment. So it has a bunch of settings like brainstorm or creativity or problem solving or sleep or relaxation or whatever. And it has a dual soundtrack. So the top is something you choose. It's either running water or rain or new wavy sounds or birds singing
sounds,
or
yeah,
birds chirping, whatever. You choose that. But then underneath that is a sound that you can barely hear that just sounds like, you know, and that's theoretically programmed to kind of tune your brain waves. I think that's the general idea. But it really helps with, I usually use it on the creativity setting, sometimes problem solving, sometimes for meditation, but not so much. And it works. It keeps you focused on what you're doing and kind of shuts out everything else. Even though you're not listening to much, there's something about it that's really effective.
Until the evil overlords take over your brain and tell you to kill everyone. But can you put in the chat window what that is again, Marianne, just so people have it? And Alyssa, you're doing deep work.
Has anyone read this book? Like, this is like
I've got it.
Focus. It's really good. I don't know if I've actually done anything he recommends to do, but I made a lot of highlights. I highlighted like half the book.
The one thing that I've tried is if you look up the Pomodoro technique.
Yeah.
Right. And so I've got one of these little red timer things, and you set it for 10 minutes. And it's really frustrating because if you set it for 10 minutes, you're not supposed to do anything other than your thing. And you have it right on your desk, and you're looking at it, and you go, shit, I want to do a Google. No, I can't. And so it's like this big red button that's going to hit you if you do something. But it's interesting to do. It's just like sort of tricking your brain or tricking yourself into doing what you should be doing.
Yeah, I think anytime you can get yourself out of the habit of shifting focus, which for me is a big one, whether it's writing things down, whether it's setting a timer, but anything where I am stopping the habit of derailing myself, because I do accept that the problem is that I derail myself and then it takes me longer to get back on track. So anything that helps with that. I'm writing down your brainwave thing, Marianne.
Longer to get back on track, but also it kind of limits the depth of your immersion in a problem, whether it's creativity or problem solving or planning something intricate. You actually have to get your brain more deeply into that problem, or you can't do it at all. You just skip over the surface and you keep moving the parts around, but you can't actually crack it if you don't, and writing fiction is certainly one of those things.
And I'm also really good at like punishing myself if I haven't done something. So sometimes setting up and being like, I'm going to work really hard on this for an hour, and I'm going to, sprint the best that I can. And at the end of an hour, if I want to keep going, that's awesome. And I can keep going. But if I don't, like if it felt like I was just pulling every word from, my heart, one painful tug at a time, then I have done what I needed to do for the day. And I kind of give myself permission to then go off and do something else. And it just frees me up emotionally. Bonnie, do you have any concentration tips that you use that you want to share?
I actually can't really think of any, but because I started working from home when I had babies, I had to focus. I'd only have an hour here or 15 minutes here to do work, and I just got really good at shutting out the rest of the world. Things like I don't check my emails more than twice a day. I never have my phone on me. It's on the kitchen table. I will, when I go to meals, I'm rarely distracted by Facebook and stuff. I think just because I started before all this stuff happened in our lives, but I can see it with my children, how easily they're distracted by everything. And yeah, I struggle with how to help them. But as soon as I sit in a chair, it's work time. So sometimes my procrastination is to not get in the chair.
Well, and there's a lot of research that does show that habits are built by cues. And I think Crystal has even talked about this, but it's that idea like, oh, if I'm in my office, then it's work time. Right. And some people will set up multiple sensory things to sort of cue their brain off. So they'll have a particular scented candle. Like, I burn this candle when I'm writing, and that's my time to do that. I will, start a musical thing. I will start my Brainwave 35 program. And like, whether or not there's something to what it's doing, or whether or not it's just enough that like I hear those whale sounds and my brain is like, oh, it's that time. Right. And so you can't like it that could be working as well. It's hard to know which one of those things is happening.
Like a trigger.
Yeah. Who cares? Yeah. Like, I don't care why it works.
If it works, it works.
I just want it to work. Right. So anything that will sort of help with that. But I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is the reminder, which I needed, which is focus takes practice.
Yeah.
And just like, if you get out of the habit of going to the gym, it seems so much harder to go back. Like, I just haven't been focused for probably the last 6 months, just between selling houses and everything else and buying places. And it's like, okay, I need to get my focus back so I can get through things, and trying different tricks to do that, whether that's timers, because I'm a big fan of the Pomodoro method, when it's blocking off time, whether it's setting up more cues, but to work on that is a good suggestion for everybody.
And keeping yourself healthy, eating healthy, making sure your environment is healthy, making sure yourself is healthy. I used to get, when I was losing focus, it was because I needed to go see the doctor and check on my health. And, there were things going on that my body needed. So sometimes trust that the reason you're suddenly not losing focus is something could be happening in your life.
Oh, yeah.
Emotionally or physically.
Yeah. And for me, like, part of it was I wasn't sleeping well, and not sleeping well is a recipe for, like, I am a girl who needs my 8 hours. Like, and if I'm not getting it, that definitely shows up. If you're
that alone can mess with your ability to concentrate on anything. Oh, yeah.
And then it became a vicious cycle, because then I would be tired. So I would be drinking more caffeine, and caffeine, one, screws with your sleep, but it also makes it harder to concentrate. So thinking again about all of those pieces work together to sort of make a difference. So that is your homework for the day, is to think about your own habits. And me too. I will self-assign myself this homework because I've been working on it, and thinking about like, what are things you can put in place to sort of help your focus and to carve out a little bit more focused time. So more quality time versus necessarily always worrying about quantity of time. Yeah. I think that can make a difference.
That's why the sprints work so well for so many of us. Is like Bonnie, you can work if you get in the chair, but then you can come up with a lot of reasons why you can't do that yet or don't feel like it right now. But if there's an appointment and, everybody else is going to be there, you don't want to be the one to miss out.
Yep. We will often do it for others when we don't do it for ourselves. So get on that. All right, everybody. I will be back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. and I'm going to be talking about titles, because apparently there was some questions about choosing titles. So
it's my new thing, titles.
There you go. So in the morning, I'm terrible at titles, so we will be stumbling through this together to find something that works. All right. Until then, I will see you all around. Thanks for the great question, Tony. That was fun to talk about. And everybody have a good night.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Oh, Alyssa has something.
Something to say?
It's fine. Yeah, it's not a big deal.
Okay.
All right. I like that you're looking out for each other. Okay. I will see you all tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye-bye.